Hey, welcome to my channel. I am Dr. Sharice and I help Black men and women heal from trauma and toxic relationships. Today we're going to be talking about colorism and using the reality show on Bravo, Real Housewives of Potomac as our framework. All references that I talk about in this video are going to be linked in the description box. I would like to direct you to two other YouTube channels that focus primarily on race, racism, and these kind of discussions. I talk about them on my channel because they're helpful in the healing part and understanding how you fit into the Black community. But Julesy and For Harriet, I think, have done extensive work, have degrees in African American studies that document extremely well the concepts that we're going to be talking about today. Before we get started on what's happening on the show, which I actually do not watch anymore, I started watching it. I used to really enjoy the reality shows, and then they became like super, really toxic, or I became more healed and it was difficult to watch. But I watched the commentary that other people do on it. And I like to know what's trending. I like to know what the topics of discussions are. I like to know what the zeitgeist is so that I can tap into it and be in touch with like reality instead of living in my little bubble. So the first definition that I would like to go over is colonialism, because everything has a beginning, right? Africans on the continent of Africa had their history and culture, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then white people, I was recently watching the Blue Eyes Samurai, and they call them white devils. But white people who wanted to take are really behind colonialism. So I want to give some definitions for context. Colonialism is defined as the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. Britain, Great Britain. Britain's 20th century empire was the largest in human history, with a quarter of the world's land and nearly 700 million people. Yet the empire drew its strength from violence, right? Definition of colonialism is taking. That's how they have so much artwork from other countries. All they did was go and take the resources. Colonialism lives on today in the forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and intolerance. And then there's another article here that I'm not going to get into, but I thought the title was helpful. How European colonialism led to the invention of race and why that still matters. Because people were different colors before, came from different places, had different histories, but no one quite weaponized race and made a hierarchy of racial systems in the way that Europeans did in order to justify kidnapping people, torturing people, and enslaving people who were free in the country that they had come from. Next definition, racism. Racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized, right? Black people in America often experience racism. I think thinking about racism as more institutionalized, right, as part of the system versus something that happens between, people at the store or in public is more helpful, because a lot of people will say they're not racist, right, when they're working on unconscious biases against people and just enacting the principles that this country was founded on. The next definition we'll get into is colorism, and I want to make a distinction between why I think anti-blackness is a better concept to view blackness in than racism and colorism. Colorism is defined as prejudice or discrimination against individuals with a dark skin tone, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. And Merriam-Webster defines anti-blackness as opposed to or hostile towards Black people. There's an article here from Boston University that's titled Anti-blackness / colorism. Right? I say anti-blackness is a better understanding, right? I started with colonialism. So the reason people think it's important to be white is that they think it's important not to be Black. There's a quote from James Baldwin. So I'm going to give their definition. I'm not going to read the whole article. Again, it's linked in the description box. Defining anti-blackness and anti-Black racism. Anti-blackness is defined as the beliefs, attitudes, actions, practices, and behaviors of individuals and institutions that devalue, minimize, and marginalize the full participation of Black people, visibly or perceived to be of African descent. It is the systematic denial of Black humanity and dignity which makes Black people effectively ineligible for full citizenship. The anti-blackness paradigm positions blackness as inherently problematic rather than recognizing the long, rich, and diverse history of Black people throughout the African diaspora, and acknowledging that Black communities across the United States and the world, this is a global phenomenon, have been severely disadvantaged as a result of historical and contemporary systematic racism. So why I think anti-blackness is a better term is that when you think of someone who's a colorist or someone who's a racist, you think light skin, you maybe think white, but anti-blackness can be purported by anyone. Anyone can be anti-black, and I think it's easier to see people hating themselves and hating blackness when we label it as anti-blackness. It's not just a light-skinned person being mean to a dark-skinned person. It is any person viewing blackness as inherently wrong. And so anyone can do that. They don't have to be a particular tone. They don't have to have a certain cultural or economic background. Anyone can hold the beliefs that something is wrong with blackness, something is wrong with Black culture, something is wrong with dark skin, something is wrong with people who have Afrocentric features. That belief, if internalized by other Black people, is still anti-blackness. So when we look at Real Housewives of Potomac and we think about the higher up you go in terms of economic status, the less dark-skinned people you see, the less Black people you see. There is a particular reason that the women on Real Housewives of Potomac are so light-skinned and have a particular look, right? They were the preference for that time. I mean, I would say light skin is still a preference. Anti-blackness is still a thing. But for the time, definitely, that they were growing up, for when they, were in their early 20s and thinking about marriage and who they would be partnering with, they were the ones that had a lot more options because they were closer to whiteness and further from blackness, perceived blackness. I think, it's important to note what these women look like. Giselle, Karen, and even Ashley. Ashley is biracial. Like Karen, Giselle, Robin, they identify as Black women. They're not biracial. Ashley is biracial, but you can see they look so similar. It's fair to say that the world treats people who look a certain way differently, right? I do believe in pretty privilege. Not that it's a thing to be believed in, but research has shown that people who have more attractive features are treated better than people who do not. And then it's important to note that there are European beauty standards as well as non-European beauty standards. And because we live in a world that is mostly controlled by white men, middle-aged white men, European beauty standards prevail. And so anyone that's seen closer to a European beauty standard is seen as more beautiful. I also think it's important to note that most African Americans are about 20% white. And when you compare the features, the phenotype of African Americans compared to Caribbean Americans or people who've never left the African continent, you will see that we look very different. And a lot of that is because of the strong history of rape that happened during slavery and during colonialism. So Real Housewives of Potomac has had an issue with colorism, perhaps from the very beginning, because these women have existed as very light-skinned and preferences to a lot of people. That shapes their worldview, and so they came into the show with that. Because there's a camera following, and because there were introduction of darker-skinned women, we got to see more instances of the subtle, right? Colorism is, even racism is often subtle. There's overt and then there's covert. You've experienced covert racism, I think, at some point, where you walk away and you're like, was that because I'm Black or was it not? You don't really know, right? You don't really know. It could be because you were a man. It could be because they were having a bad day. There could be other reasons for it. But colorism acts in the same way, that you can walk away from an experience and you're thinking, was that because I'm dark-skinned that she didn't want to handle me? Or is it just our personalities don't match? Is it just that we don't get along? Or is it that there is an unconscious bias? So looking over a period of time, right? I don't think anyone made one instance of watching, Robin interact with Wendy on the show and said, oh, there's colorism. No, I think over a series of seasons and years of watching them, it was kind of clear that there is something underlying at play here. The difficulty, I think, in acknowledging, when you think of someone who's racist, Most people who are racist are ignorant and they don't want to go out and hurt people or have negative beliefs about people, but they do. So it's very hard to acknowledge that, wait a second, I had this terrible idea of someone who's perfectly fine. Just because they're different than me doesn't make them any less than. But you have to admit that you made a mistake. You have to admit that for years you had negative beliefs about a group of people who are very similar to you, who have similar experiences as you. And why would I expect women who've never gone to college, not all of them, right? Why would I expect women who have limited experiences, even though they have a plethora of resources, but who have limited experiences, who probably have not read books and research articles on the topic, to admit in public on national TV that, oh yeah, I don't really like dark-skinned people. I didn't think Wendy belonged to the group because she's dark-skinned. I didn't think she fit because, I don't really want to be around dark-skinned people or hang out with dark-skinned people. That's not really, my style. Why would anybody say that out loud? That would be a very difficult thing to say out loud. So when they had a discussion on colorism during one of their reunions, why would it go well? Why would we expect deep, nuanced discussion from women who are not scholars, from women who have not taught anyone on colorism or racism, for women who have never had to stop and think about the effect of colorism on their life because they've benefited from being light-skinned? Why would we expect them to do that, right? So I think that they brought on the new Nigerian housewife to prove that they're not colorists. That's what I think. But because we're working with the term anti-blackness and not colorism, we can say just because you bring another dark-skinned woman on doesn't mean you all are not colorists. Doesn't mean that this dark-skinned woman is not anti-black. In fact, right, I'm a little concerned about the way she's been pronouncing her name on the show. I think she pronounces it Nneka. But she introduced herself in a way that was not the correct pronunciation of her name. To me, that's very much like a trying to please others versus standing in your truth. I think names are very sacred. And so, where I come from, it's pronounced Nneka. But I understand that in her culture, it's pronounced a different way. Like her family pronounces her name a different way. I think you should make people pronounce your way correctly. I'm not sure I would go so far as embarrassing. I saw a clip of a woman stopping a reporter on TV every time. I think she said it like 7 times, made her say her name 7 times. A little embarrassing, but I understand the point. And we need to see more people asking people to pause. No, you could do it. You could do it. It's just a name. You can pronounce my name the way you hear it. You can. If you don't care about my name, you won't. But I'm going to ask you to say it correctly. I think that's important. The other thing that I think is noteworthy is this new housewife having disagreements with Wendy is wild to me. Not wild. It's anti-black. It presents as very anti-black. The fact that she feels comfortable going after Wendy, right, going in a negative way versus viewing her as an ally or someone that she can shoot scenes with and have fun with, being used by Ashley, who's spreading despicable conversations between the ladies about, another issue that I think is far beyond a lot of people's knowledge, experience, not even mine. Why would she let Ashley put her in this position? Why would she take up the mantle to say these things on national TV when they may not be true and when she knows that there can be such a negative effect about saying these things out loud? So one of the big storylines that is happening right now is Nneka is describing. See, the problem here for me is, even if Wendy's family was Osu, as they say, right? I did some research. It's not just outcasts, right? It's part of maybe more like a caste system that was happening in Nigeria and people being seen at the bottom. Because why? Because they were furthest away from whiteness. Not only did white European people come in and take and rob people of their resources and the valuable things in their community, but they brought in their own culture, their own religion, their own history, and said, we are at the top and we are right. Everything else is wrong. So when people talk about voodoo, right, which is a legitimate spiritual practice, it's not all about evil spirits, right? Every religion and, sect has good and bad, light and dark, right? It's one of the things my YouTube channel is founded on, is spirituality. There's so many ways to do spirituality, but the white man came in and said, our way is the right way. I think one of the strangest things to see is Black people being Catholic. It's one of the strangest things to see, because if you understand the history, all these people did was come in, tell you everything you are doing is wrong and everything I do is right. And so you need to be right. You need to be white like me. And practicing this religion will get you closer to being white and good like me. It was just a bunch of lies. But we see that even now, when someone is anything other than Christian across the world, a lot of places, whatever the dominant religion is, right? They want you to be whatever the dominant is. Christianity is the most popular religion in the world, I think, because it gets a lot right. But also, Christianity is the greatest story ever told. Now, I love Jesus, okay? I think the story of Jesus is powerful and moving, and Christianity gets a lot right. But I'm not going to act like every other religion is evil or wrong just because I like Christianity. But that is one of the things that happened because of the slave trade and colonialism. People over time, right? This is not something that just happened yesterday. Over centuries, over generations of information handed down to people, started teaching their children to be right in the world, to be successful in the world, to get some money like the white man, you have to do this. And so then everything other than the thing that the white man does is seen as wrong. And I just want to remind you that it's not. That it's not. That even if Wendy's family was Osu, even if they practiced African spirituality, nothing would be wrong with that. That is the culture of their ancestors. And why would they not be allowed to honor that? Lots of African spirituality includes ancestral worship or honoring your ancestors. And people will demonize it because you have not stopped to check what the history says. You have not stopped to ask yourself, why do I believe this? Where did I learn this from? Who's teaching this? Who's telling me that this is the way things should be? Is it really so bad? Is it really so wrong? I would encourage you to do some of your own research to see that for yourself. And while you're at it, I want you to examine for yourself if you are practicing any self-hate. I'm talking about any complaints or frustrations about your hair, about your skin tone, about your vernacular or the way you talk, any problems that you have when you reflect on your personal history, your ancestral history, and Black culture at large. Ask yourself if you are working based on any biases that you have not acknowledged. If you have said or thought negative things about Black people for just being Black, for just doing Black things, because we are lit. We do move the culture. But they demonize us for being ourselves. And we can see even on a reality show like Real Housewives of Potomac, it's being perpetuated. This anti-blackness, this complaining about Black culture, this complaining about Blackness is being shown on the show and then denied. But you can look in your own life. I really believe each one teach one. Look in your own life on things that you can work on for yourself, because there's so much to unlearn. There is so much to unlearn. So look at the articles that are in my description box. Check out videos by Josie and for Harriet. Let me know if you have any questions in the comment section. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. And thank you for watching.